A husband and wife walked into an adoption agency, eager to adopt a child. They were well-dressed, well-mannered, and spoke eloquently, leaving a great first impression on the social workers. However, when asked about their profession, the husband smiled and said, "We run a circus." The social workers immediately exchanged glances. A circus? A constantly moving environment. Animals everywhere, unpredictable schedules. It didn't exactly scream stable home life. Sensing their concern, the couple quickly produced photos of their luxurious 55-foot motorhome, spotless, well-maintained, and equipped with a fully furnished nursery. That calmed the social workers a little, but another concern arose. What about the child's education? The husband confidently replied, "We've arranged for a full-time tutor who will teach all standard subjects, plus French, Mandarin, and computer skills." Impressed, but still cautious, the social workers pressed on. But is a circus environment really suitable for a child? This time, the wife took over. "Our nanny is a certified expert in pediatric care, child welfare, nutrition, and exercise. Everything a growing child needs." The social workers, having all their concerns addressed so perfectly, finally smiled and nodded. "You've certainly put a lot of thought into this. What age child were you hoping to adopt?" The husband grinned. "It doesn't really matter, as long as they fit in a cannon." A husband and wife were strolling down the high street when the wife suddenly stopped in front of a jewelry store window. "Oh, look at that necklace!" she gasped, pressing her hands against the glass. It was a breathtaking diamond piece, shimmering under the store lights. She urged her husband to go inside, just to take a closer look. Although she was clearly in love with it, she reassured him. "You don't have to buy it for me." The husband, ever the romantic, smiled and said, "I promise one day. It'll be yours." 1 month later, the wife sat at home, growing increasingly frustrated. It was late. Her husband was nowhere to be found. Finally, she grabbed her phone and called him. "Where the hell are you?" she snapped. Her husband, calm as ever, replied, "Darling, remember that jewelry store where you saw the diamond necklace and totally fell in love with it?" Her frustration melted into excitement. "Yes, I remember," she said, her heart racing. "And remember how I told you, baby, it'll be yours one day?" By now, she was blushing, grinning ear to ear. "Yes, yes, I remember, my love." Her husband took a deep breath and said, "Well, I'm in the bar right next to that shop." One evening, a husband comes home from work, sets down his briefcase, and barely gets his shoes off before his wife greets him. "Honey, the upstairs bathroom has a leaking pipe. Could you fix it?" she asks sweetly. The husband sighs and shakes his head. "What do I look like, Mr. Plumber?" A few days later, he walks through the door, only to be met with another request. "Honey, my car won't start. I think it needs a new battery. Could you change it for me?" Rolling his eyes, he mutters, "What do I look like, Mr. Goodwrench?" Another few days pass and a heavy storm rolls in. His wife notices water dripping from the ceiling. "Honey, there's a leak in the roof. Can you fix it?" Exasperated, he throws up his hands. "What do I look like, Bob Vila?" The next day, the husband comes home and notices something strange. The bathroom pipe, fixed, the car running like new, the roof, no more leak. Amazed, he turns to his wife. "Wow, everything's fixed. What happened?" She shrugs. "Oh, I hired a handyman. He said he'd do it for free if I either baked him a cake or slept with him." The husband smirks. "Well, what kind of cake did you bake?" His wife looks him dead in the eyes and says, "What do I look like, Betty Crocker?" The FBI was hiring a new assassin, and after weeks of grueling background checks, intense interviews, and rigorous skill assessments, they had narrowed it down to 3 final candidates. To test their unwavering commitment, the agents devised one last challenge. The first candidate, a man, was handed a gun and led to a heavy metal door. "Inside this room, your wife is seated in a chair," the agent explained. "Your final test is to eliminate her. We need to know you will follow orders under any circumstances." The man looked at the agent in shock. "You can't be serious. I could never do that." The agent sighed. "Then you're not the right man for this job. Take your wife and go home." The second man was given the same instructions. He took the gun, walked into the room, and closed the door behind him. 5 minutes passed. Silence. Then the door opened, and the man stepped out, tears streaming down his face. I tried, but I just can't do it." The agent shook his head. "You don't have what it takes. Take your wife home." Finally, the third candidate, a woman, was given the same instructions. She took the gun and entered the room. Within seconds, gunshots rang out, one after another, then screaming, crashing, banging against the walls. A chair tipped over, more struggling, then silence. The agent stood, wide-eyed, as the door slowly creaked open. The woman stood there, panting and wiping sweat from her brow. "Some joker loaded the gun with blanks," she huffed. "I had to finish the job the hard way." A woman brings her lover home during the day while her husband is at work. Everything is going smoothly, until her 9-year-old son comes home unexpectedly. Catching sight of the stranger, the boy quickly hides in the bedroom closet. But before he can process what's happening, his mother panics and shoves her lover into the same closet, unaware her son is already inside. The darkness is interrupted by a small voice. "Dark in here," the man, startled, whispers back. Yes, it is. "I have a baseball." "That's nice. Want to buy it?" "No, thanks." "My dad's outside." All right. How much?" $150. The man sighs, reaches for his wallet, and hands over the cash. A few weeks later, history repeats itself. The lover barely escapes into the closet as the husband arrives home early once again. Just as he steadies his breath, he hears a familiar voice. "Dark in here." The man groans. "Yes, I remember. I have a Wilson infielder's glove." Defeated, the man asks, "All right, how much?" $350. Grumbling, the man hands over the money. A few days later, the boy's father suggests, "Grab your glove and let's play some catch." The boy shrugs. "I can't. I sold my ball and my glove." His father frowns. "How much did you sell them for?" $500. The father gasps. "That's outrageous. You should never overcharge people like that. We're going to church. You need to confess your greed." Dragging his son to the church, the father sits him in the confession booth and closes the door behind him. The boy sits quietly for a moment, then leans forward and whispers, "Dark in here." The priest sighs. "Please, don't start that again." After 20 years of marriage, Dave's wife decides to surprise him with a visit to a strip club for his birthday. What's the harm, she thinks. I'll be there with him after all. As they approach the entrance, the doorman greets them with a wide grin. "Hey, Dave. How you doing, buddy?" His wife raises an eyebrow. "How does he know you?" Dave laughs nervously. "Oh, he's on my bowling team." She eyes him suspiciously, but lets it slide. They find a table, and before they can even place an order, a waitress appears with a glass of red wine. "Here's your usual, Dave," she says cheerfully. His wife's expression darkens. "Usual? Since when do you have a usual at a strip club?" Dave shrugs. "Oh, she's in the ladies' bowling league, honey. We share lanes sometimes." Before she can respond, a stripper struts over, throws her arms around Dave, and coos, "Hey, Davey, want your usual table dance, big boy?" That's it. His wife snaps, "You lying, cheating." Grabbing her purse, she storms out of the club. Dave scrambles after her, catching up just as she's getting into a cab. He jumps in beside her before she can slam the door. "Honey, wait. This is just a huge misunderstanding." She isn't buying it. She's yelling at the top of her lungs, calling him every name in the book. Then, from the front seat, the cab driver turns his head, grinning. "Damn, Dave, looks like you picked an angry one tonight." Charlie, Mason, and Buck found themselves standing at the pearly gates after a tragic car accident. St. Peter greeted them with a solemn nod. "Welcome to heaven, gentlemen. Here, you'll be given a mode of transportation based on how faithful you were in life." He turned to Charlie first. "Charlie, you cheated on your wife 4 times. For that, you'll drive around heaven in this old beat-up Dodge." Charlie sighed and took the keys. Next, St. Peter looked at Mason. "You weren't as bad, but you still cheated twice. You get a Toyota station wagon." Mason shrugged. "Could be worse." Finally, St. Peter smiled at Buck. Ah, Buck, a model husband. No affairs, no cheating, completely loyal. For that, you get a Ferrari. Buck beamed as he hopped into his sleek red sports car. A few days later, Mason and Charlie pulled up beside Buck's Ferrari, only to find him sitting on the hood, head in hands, crying. "What's wrong, Buck?" Mason asked. "You've got the best ride in heaven." Buck slowly lifted his head, his face full of despair. "I just saw my wife go by on a skateboard." 3 married men were sitting in a pool hall, drowning their sorrows and arguing over who had the worst marriage. The first man sighed. "I have it the worst. My prudish wife won't sleep with me more than once a month. She flat out refuses." The others shook their heads in sympathy. One of them asked, "So what did you do about it?" He smirked and pointed across the room. "I found comfort with that blonde over there by the pool table. Unlike my wife, she'll do anything." The men chuckled, nodding knowingly. The second man took a deep breath. "You think that's bad? My uptight wife won't even sleep with me once a year." The others groaned in disbelief. "So what did you do about it?" He grinned and pointed in the same direction. "I got my rocks off with that same blonde by the pool table. She'll literally do any guy." The men roared with laughter. Then the third man sighed deeply. "That's rough, fellas, but honestly, I have it the worst." The others leaned in. "What's the problem with your wife?" He pointed across the room. "Well, for starters, she's always down here playing pool." Sam and his wife Rachel were enjoying a sunny afternoon at the golf club when Rachel stepped up to the tee. With a smooth, confident swing, she sent the ball soaring down the fairway, a perfect 300-yard drive. Sam's jaw dropped. "Wow, I've never seen you play this well before," he exclaimed. Rachel smiled and shrugged. "I took lessons." A couple of days later, they were on the tennis court for a mixed doubles match. Rachel's serves were lightning fast, her volleys precise. She didn't miss a single shot. Sam wiped his brow, staring in disbelief. "I've never seen you hit so well before." Rachel smirked. "I took lessons." That weekend, they had a cozy dinner at home. When Rachel brought out a perfectly cooked beef Wellington plated with restaurant-style finesse, Sam took one bite and groaned in delight. "This is delicious. I've never seen you cook like this before." Rachel gave him a knowing look. "I took lessons." After dinner, Rachel shot him that look, the one that made his pulse race. Moments later, they were upstairs, lost in passion. Half an hour later, Sam lay beside her, breathless, staring at the ceiling. Wow, that was incredible. Amazing, so hot. He turned to her, eyes wide with realization. "I want a divorce." 3 men sat around a table at their favorite bar, beers in hand, discussing life, work, and inevitably their wives. As the conversation drifted into marital woes, the first man sighed and shook his head. "I think my wife is having an affair with an electrician," he said, taking a sip of his drink. The other 2 looked at him intrigued. "When I got home last night, I found a pair of pliers and some insulating tape behind the radiator in the bedroom. We haven't had any electrical work done in the house, so how else did they get there?" The second man leaned in, nodding gravely. "That's rough, mate, but I think my wife is having an affair with a carpenter." "A carpenter?" the first man asked. "Yeah. Last night I found a tool belt in the laundry basket. We haven't had any renovations done in years. It doesn't make sense." Both men turned to the third, who had been unusually quiet. He exhaled heavily, swirling his beer. "I hate to say this, fellas, but I don't think either of you have it as bad as I do," he muttered. They leaned in, bracing for his confession. "My wife," he continued, pausing for effect, "is having an affair with a horse." The other 2 recoiled. "A horse? Have you lost your mind?" the first man blurted. "Are you sure she's the crazy one here?" the second added, raising an eyebrow. The third man leaned back in his chair, took a slow sip of his beer, and smirked. "It's simple, boys. When I got home last night, I found a jockey hiding in the wardrobe." It had only been 2 weeks since the wedding, and while the honeymoon phase was still in full swing, the husband was starting to feel a familiar itch. He missed his old buddies, the late-night laughs, and the carefree bar nights. One evening, as he finished dinner, he casually stretched and said, "Honey, I'll be right back." His wife, lounging on the couch, looked up with an adoring smile. "Where are you going, Coochie-Coo?" Just to the bar, pretty face. Gonna grab a beer with the guys." Her eyes twinkled mischievously. "You want a beer, my love?" She sauntered to the refrigerator, flung open the door, and revealed an impressive lineup. 25 different brands of beer from 12 different countries. German lagers, Dutch pilsners, Japanese ales. Enough variety to put an international pub to shame. The husband blinked, momentarily at a loss. "Well, yes, Lollipop, but at the bar, they have frozen glasses." Before he could finish, she whipped open the freezer and pulled out a massive frosted beer mug so cold it sent a shiver down her spine. "You want a frozen glass, puppy face?" she cooed, handing it to him with a wink. He swallowed hard. "Yes, but, at the bar, they have hors d'oeuvres, little snacks, really good ones." She raised an eyebrow. "You want hors d'oeuvres, Poochie-Poo?" With a flourish, she opened the oven and pulled out a spread fit for a king. Crispy chicken wings, pigs in blankets, stuffed mushrooms, golden pork strips. The aroma alone made his stomach betray him with a loud grumble. Desperation crept in. He cleared his throat and tried one last time. "But my sweet honey, at the bar, there's swearing, dirty jokes, that kind of thing." His wife took a deep breath, put her hands on her hips, and with a sugary sweet smile leaned in close. "You want dirty words, sweetie pie?" she said. "Then drink your bloody beer in your darn frozen mug and eat your stupid snacks. Because you're married now, and you aren't going anywhere. Got it, moron?" The husband sat down in silence, took a long sip of his perfectly chilled beer, and reached for a chicken wing. Married life had its perks. A priest and a nun were traveling to a remote monastery when their car sputtered to a stop in the middle of nowhere. Above them, a fierce blizzard howled, covering the road in a thick blanket of snow. With no choice but to seek shelter, they spotted a small, abandoned cabin nearby and hurried inside. The place was simple but dry, with a dusty bed, a pile of blankets, and a single sleeping bag. The priest, ever the gentleman, gestured toward the bed. "Sister, you take the bed. I'll sleep in the sleeping bag on the floor." The nun nodded gratefully and climbed under the covers while the priest settled into his sleeping bag. The wind howled outside, shaking the tiny cabin, but at least they were safe. A few minutes passed before the nun's voice broke the silence. Father, I'm cold." The priest sighed, got up, grabbed a blanket, and tucked it around her. "Is that better, sister?" "Yes, Father, much better." Satisfied, he crawled back into his sleeping bag and started drifting off when he heard her voice again. "Father, I'm still cold." Suppressing another sigh, he got up, fetched another blanket, and carefully draped it over her. "There. That should help." "Oh, yes, Father. Much better," she murmured. Shaking his head, he slid back into his sleeping bag, determined to finally get some rest. He was just slipping into a dream when, Father, I'm still so cold." The priest lay there for a moment, staring at the wooden ceiling. He exhaled slowly, then sat up. "Sister," he said, rubbing his temples, "we are alone in the middle of nowhere, and this storm isn't letting up. No one but you, me, and the Lord himself will ever know what happens here tonight." He paused for effect. "So how about, just for tonight, we act as though we were married?" The nun hesitated, thinking it over. A faint blush crept across her cheeks, but curiosity got the better of her. "All right, Father," she said softly. "Just for tonight, we'll act as though we're married." The priest smiled, nodded, and in a calm, steady voice said, "Wonderful. Now get up and get your own darn blanket, you great lazy lump." After 35 years of marriage, a husband and wife found themselves sitting across from a therapist, their expressions a mix of exhaustion and frustration. The therapist folded her hands and asked, "So what seems to be the problem?" The husband took a deep breath and launched into a passionate, pain-filled monologue. "Where do I even start?" he huffed. "For years, I felt neglected, lonely, unloved, unappreciated. There's no intimacy, no connection, just emptiness. I feel like a ghost in my own home, invisible, unwanted, like a piece of old furniture no one bothers to dust." His wife rolled her eyes, but he pressed on, listing every grievance, big and small, from the last 3.5 decades. The therapist listened patiently, nodding along until finally she stood up, walked around her desk, and motioned for the husband to stand. Confused, he got to his feet. Without a word, the therapist took him by the shoulders, pulled him in, and kissed him, long, deep, and passionately. His eyes went wide, his arms stiffened in shock. Then, as she pulled away, he simply sat back down, dazed and silent. The therapist turned to the wife and said, "This is what your husband needs at least 3 times a week. Can you see to it?" The wife pursed her lips, thinking it over. Then, with a shrug, she replied, "Well, I can drop him off here on Mondays and Wednesdays, but Fridays are book club." A woman waddles into the doctor's office, clearly in distress. "Doctor, you've got to help me." She groans, "I was just by an elephant." The doctor, taken aback, gestures for her to drop her trousers. As the woman bends over, the doctor's eyes widen. Her backside is an absolute disaster. "This doesn't make sense," the doctor mutters, scratching his head. "An elephant's, isn't nearly wide enough to cause this kind of damage." The woman's lip quivers as she whispers, "You don't understand. Me first." A small-town farmer rarely needed to visit the city, preferring his self-sufficient life. But when his pantry ran low on essentials, he figured it was time to make the trip. He decided to take his youngest child along, thinking it was the perfect opportunity to show off his worldly knowledge. As they drove into town, they chattered away until they reached their first stop, the bakery. "Where are we, Dad?" the little one asked, eyes wide with curiosity. "Why, this is John the baker, youngest," the farmer replied. "You see, when Dad doesn't make any bread, John makes it for him." The child pondered for a moment, then asked, "Is it as good as yours?" With a small grin, the farmer replied, "No, mine is better." And off he went to buy some bread. At their next stop, the little one eagerly asked again, "Where are we now?" "This is Ted's liquor store," the farmer explained. "When Dad doesn't make any beer, Ted makes it for him." The child thought hard before asking, "Is it as good as yours?" With a bigger grin, the farmer chuckled, "No, mine is better," and headed inside to grab some beer. Finally, they arrived at the butcher shop. By now, the little one thought they had figured out how the world worked. "So then, Dad?" the child began, looking up expectantly. "Yes, that's right, little one. This is Tom the butcher, and when Dad hasn't made any sausages—" The farmer trailed off. "Tom makes them for you?" the child asked hesitantly. "Exactly," the farmer beamed. "And yours are better," the little one shouted proudly. "That's my smart kid!" The farmer laughed, ruffling their hair as he went to collect his sausages. On the drive home, they passed the postal truck coming the other way. "Hey, Dad!" the little one exclaimed. "It's Pete the postman." "That's right." The farmer nodded, but sensing where this was headed, he quickly added, "But we need Pete. Your dad is a farmer and can do a lot of things, but I can't do what Pete does." "Oh, yes." The child nodded. "Mom says so, too." The farmer blinked. "What?" After a beautiful wedding, a young couple set off on their honeymoon, basking in the glow of newlywed bliss. The first morning, as the sun streamed through their hotel window, the bride stepped out of the shower, wrapped only in steam, completely bare. Before she could reach for a towel, her husband held up a hand. "Wait, don't move," he said, grabbing his camera. With a quick click, he snapped a photo. She raised an eyebrow. "Why take a picture? You can see me naked anytime." He smiled and tucked the camera away. "So I can carry it in my wallet, close to my heart." Her expression softened, and she leaned in to kiss him. Touched by the moment, the husband headed off to take his own shower. When he emerged, dripping and towel-clad, he was surprised to find his wife standing there, camera in hand. Before he could react, she snapped a photo. He chuckled. "Ah, so you want to keep my picture close to your heart, too?" She grinned mischievously. "No," she said, "I just need it enlarged." For his entire life, Henry had been alone. Love had always eluded him, and by the time he reached 96, he had resigned himself to a solitary existence. When his time came, he passed away peacefully and found himself at the pearly gates of heaven. Meanwhile, across the world, Margaret had lived a similarly lonely life. Though she filled her days with books and quiet contemplation, love had never found her. At 102, she too passed away and ascended to heaven. As fate would have it, the two met in the heavenly library, both drawn to the endless shelves of books. They struck up a conversation about their favorite authors, debated classic novels, and laughed over shared literary tastes. For the first time in their long lives, though technically they were now beyond life, they had found love. Hand in hand, they approached God. "Lord," Henry said, "we spent our lives alone, but now we've found each other. We'd like to be married." God stroked his beard and nodded thoughtfully. "This is quite extraordinary," he said. "Give me some time and I'll get back to you." So they waited and waited. 4 years passed, then at last, God returned with a smile. "Good news! I've found a priest who can marry you." Overjoyed, Henry and Margaret were wed, blissful in their love. But as the centuries passed, something changed. The romance faded, their conversations grew stale, and even eternity began to feel a little too long. One day they approached God again, looking sorrowful. "Lord," Margaret sighed, "we've had a wonderful time together, but we think it's time to part ways. We'd like a divorce." God stared at them, exasperated. "A divorce? Are you serious?" He threw up his hands. "Do you have any idea how long it took me to find a priest up here? How long do you think it'll take me to find a lawyer?" A man and woman had been married for over 60 years. They had shared everything: laughter, tears, dreams, and hardships. There were no secrets between them except for one. At the top of the little old woman's closet sat a shoebox, untouched for decades. She had once told her husband never to open it or ask about its contents. Out of love and respect, he never had. But one day, as life's journey neared its end, the little old woman fell gravely ill. The doctor gently told them that she would not recover. As the couple sat together, reminiscing over their many years, the old man's eyes fell on the shoebox. With a heavy heart, he took it down, brought it to his wife's bedside, and asked, "My love, do you think it's time I finally know what's inside?" She smiled weakly and nodded. With trembling hands, he lifted the lid. Inside, he found 2 small crocheted dolls and a stack of money totaling $95,000. He looked at her in surprise. "Darling, what do these mean?" She reached for his hand, her voice soft but full of warmth. "When we were about to be married, my grandmother gave me a piece of advice for a happy marriage. Whenever you get angry, don't argue. Just keep quiet and crochet a doll instead." The old man felt his eyes well up. In all those years, decades of love, trials, and companionship, she had only made 2 dolls. His heart swelled with joy. He had been the luckiest husband in the world. Then, wiping away a tear, he asked, "That explains the dolls, but what about all this money?" His wife smiled gently and said, "Oh, that's the money I made from selling the other dolls." A man sat in a bar with his buddies, nursing a beer and recounting the wild events of the past week. "Last Friday was payday," he began, "so I figured I'd go out for a drink with the boys. You know, just a couple of rounds, nothing crazy." His friends nodded knowingly. They had all said just a couple of rounds before. Well, one drink led to another, and before I knew it, I was out the whole weekend. Didn't even make it home until late Sunday night. One of his friends whistled. "Whew! And how did your wife take it?" The man shook his head. "Oh, she was not pleased. She nagged for what felt like an eternity, going on, and then at one point she looked me dead in the eye and said, 'How would you like it if you didn't see me for 2 or 3 days?'" The group leaned in. "And what did you say?" "Well," he smirked, taking a sip of his beer, "I told her that would be fine by me." His friends erupted into laughter. "So did she leave?" one of them asked. The man chuckled and shook his head. No, she didn't leave. But the jokes on her on the third day, my left eye started to open up a little bit. The table roared with laughter, clinking their glasses in honor of their friend, though they all silently reminded themselves to tread carefully at home.